Hello.
Welcome to our first live session. So today we've got 3 media sessions for you run by...
Hello, welcome to this Spark recap session on delivery, how to deliver your message with the maximum impact and in a way that gives confidence not just to your audience that you're capable and confident of delivering this message, but importantly gives a bit of confidence to you, because I know how nerve-wracking it is to have to stand in front of people and deliver a message. For those who don't know me, if you weren't at our session in Lesotho last year, my name is Simeon Corti, Sim, and my background is in broadcasting, really. I started as a radio presenter, kind of way back 25 years ago on the BBC, then got into television presenting, and then moved into writing. So I wrote comedy for TV shows like Have I Got News For You, and then became an author and wrote a travel book called The Long and Winding Road, which I'm very lucky in that it won a lot of awards. So the reason I tell you that stuff is I've kind of got 2 sets of skills that I'm going to share with you over 3 recap sessions that we're going to do. Those skills are in presenting, which is what we're going to talk about right now, and also in writing, in how to get a complicated message simple for people to understand and people to engage with, and then hopefully influential. Get your message to actually persuade people to go with your idea. So we'll cover that in the later sessions. This session right now is a recap of everything we talked about at our camp last year to do with how to have some presence and some gravitas and some confidence when you're delivering to a group of people. You might remember that we talked about how you've got to have congruency. Remember that word? Your message needs to be congruent with your body language, because people respond first to what they see and second to what they hear. Remember we talked about this? So where you see this go wrong is where somebody might sort of come up to the front of the room to deliver their message and say, hi everybody, really excited to share this project with you today. I've got very, very exciting news. And the words say one thing, but the body language says something entirely different. And that's what we call incongruent. 2 things not matching. So we need to try and get the message and the body language, what you're doing physically, matching, so that the journey is easy for our audience and they understand what you're saying. Now, at the end of this session, I'm really happy to ask questions. This is Facebook Live, and I would love to hear from you. So if at any point throughout this you think, oh, I wonder what you would do about that, or if you have any observations, any thoughts, any questions to ask, just type them in the comments section underneath this video, and we'll deal with those at the end. Right, so where do we start? Well, you might remember that we had a useful acronym for our body language tools, because there are something like 1 million different body language traits that have been identified, and that would be crazy to dig into all those. So we nailed it down to 6. Do you remember this? It was PLATES, plates. And each one of those letters represents a really easy to remember physical choice that you can make that will give your message even more impact with your audience. And the first, the P, was for posture. Basically the architecture of how we stand or how we sit. So I'll get to sitting in just a moment, but first of all, the choice we make when we stand up. Sounds really simple, doesn't it? Surely we're just standing up. But here's the thing. A lot of people say to us, how can I get more presence when I'm talking to people? How can I get more gravitas when I'm delivering my message? So especially kind of younger people, if they're feeling sort of under pressure in front of a more senior audience, that's one of the big things that they really want to get. And the good news is, it's easy, actually. It's a learned technique that you can learn to do. The simple rule to remember is posture equals presence. Posture equals presence. If you want more presence at the front of the room, it starts with your posture. Imagine those actors who have incredible presence and gravitas on screen. I'm talking about the likes of Dame Judi Dench or Anthony Hopkins, maybe Morgan Freeman, You know, these people tend to play quite high status characters, don't they? You know, they play kings, queens, serial killers, God. You know, they're fairly high status people. Now, if you gave their costumes to someone else and asked them to do the part, it wouldn't be quite as good. Or if you gave their script to just somebody off the street, it wouldn't be quite as good. So it's not the costume or the words that are giving them that gravitas. It's a choice they're making physically. It's not just actors who do this. I use Beyonce as a good example as well. She moves around a lot. She dances all over the stage, but she also has that ability to stand still and get 50,000 people waiting to hear what she has to say. So what are they doing? Well, the good news is they weren't born with it. None of these people were born with gravitas. None of them were toddlers, kind of 3 or 4 years old, toddling around a room commanding an audience. It's just a learned skill. And what they're all doing is learning to work with gravity rather than against gravity. It's where gravitas comes from. What most of us do when we're under pressure, and we're standing in front of a group of people, is have a kind of anti-gravitas going on. We kind of start working against gravity. And you've probably seen people do this when they're delivering a meeting or a presentation, and they'll just start swaying. And I'm not aware I'm even doing it when I'm standing at the front of the room. I'm doing it because as a child or a baby, when I was anxious and I was stressed, a grown-up would rock me and make me feel a little bit better. And well, my mum couldn't be here today, so I'm just going to carry on unconsciously swaying while I deliver my message. Now, I'm not aware I'm doing it. I could be doing it for 10 minutes. I could be doing it for half an hour. But for the audience, it very quickly starts to become a little bit distracting. And it's like a pendulum effect happens. They start to feel a little bit sleepy, maybe a little bit seasick. There are other versions of this off-center shuffle that we see. There's the hip-to-hip version. So you're kind of delivering your message kind of like switching from one hip to the other hip. Men, not exclusively men, but men quite often do the hip-to-hip thing and then deliver the message to the toe of their shoe. Yes, that's right, very important news. I'm just going to talk to my shoe for no reason. Now look, there's nothing really wrong with any of these things, apart from human beings are social pack animals. So when somebody stands up and decides to give them a message, everybody in that audience is making a subconscious set of decisions that they're not really even aware they're making. They're making decisions like, can I trust this person? Have I got any confidence in this person? Do they look like they know what they're talking about? And any of this kind of anti-gravity thing, this off-center shuffle that goes on, just erodes that. And it just gives a little element of uncertainty to the audience that you maybe don't know what you're talking about. You may be a little bit untrustworthy. It's where in English we get the word shifty from. If someone's done something wrong, maybe a child's been naughty, or I don't know, if you have a builder doing some work on your flat or your house and they break something and you say, well, what's happened here? And they go, oh no, it's nothing to do with me, that wasn't me. When people have got something to hide or they're lying, they typically move about a lot. They become a moving target. So the first thing you can do to look more confident is stand still and get centered. Do you remember we did this exercise where we all jumped in the air? We all had a big old jump and land. I don't want you to jump in the air before you give your presentation, but we did it because when you're in the air, a reset mechanism happens in your brain and you land completely centered with your weight evenly distributed between your left and right feet and the balls of your feet and your heels. I'm not saying to jump in the air. I mean, feel free if you're able to do it right now. By all means, stand up and give it a go. Jump and land, and the way you land, that's how it feels to be centered, because you can't land on your hip. You will damage your hip. Your brain makes you do a reset because it recognizes gravity. So that centered feeling is what we're aiming for. The good news for you is this will also help you feel more confident when you're at the front of the room. I'll explain why in just a moment. But to really get the maximum benefit from this, the position of your feet should be shoulder width apart. Shoulder width apart for you. So everyone's shoulders are a different width. Just have a look down at your feet and just think, right, are they shoulder width apart? This will probably feel weird. That's because you've spent most of your life standing with your feet hip width apart, and that feels normal. To go shoulder width apart might feel a little bit odd. It's the way you would stand if you were on a bus and it was crowded, you couldn't get a seat, you had to stand. It's what you'd instinctively do because it's a position of strength. You're just getting the architecture of your body to give you the maximum strength. So your knees are flexible, but your feet are shoulder width apart. If you play golf, it's the position you're in before you take a golf swing. If you play tennis, it's how you would stand before you serve. So you see sports people do this all the time. It just feels a bit odd sometimes for you to assume this position when you're standing in front of a group of people. So let's just talk about the weirdness factor. Quite a few of the things that I'm going to remind you of in this little session will feel a bit odd, but they serve your audience. They actually help you look more confident and have more impact with your audience. And this is the first one of those. We quite often hear from women in particular that this feels odd. Men tend to kind of be happier with it. I don't know why. I think it's to do with cultural conditioning. Sometimes men say, yeah, I love this. This feels like I've just got off my motorbike or my horse. Sometimes women say, oh, it doesn't feel ladylike. It feels a bit manly to stand with my feet shoulder width apart. My opinion on this is it's nothing to do with gender at all. It really is social conditioning. I mean, we still see this like every day. You're bombarded with images that kind of reinforce this social conditioning. So let's just kind of drill into that right now. I'm going to give you some female examples of women who choose to put their feet shoulder width apart when they want to feel strong and confident. So from Hollywood, somebody like Julia Roberts. In each of these pictures, she's under pressure. She's being faced by the paparazzi, or she's on stage collecting an award, even in a pencil skirt there in that middle picture. You can see she's just choosing to plant her feet shoulder width apart. Is it ladylike, I hear? Well, I'm broadcasting to you from England, and probably the best example of being ladylike in England is our own Queen, Queen Elizabeth II. Here's a picture of her years ago. When she's with children, she's a younger lady, you'd think she would be softening up a little bit, but just notice that even in this moment, she's standing with her feet shoulder width apart. She's just taking up the bit of planet Earth that's due to her. We all have a right to stand like this. These days, the Queen outdoes Obama. Look at this. It's like she's looking at him going, what are you doing, man? Get your feet shoulder width apart. Sometimes people say, yeah, but is it a seniority thing? I'm one of the youngest people in the room. Does this gravitas and presence come with age? And it's absolutely nothing to do with age. Every single one of the teenagers on the Harry Potter poster is standing like this. Now, if Emma Watson in this poster was standing like my teenage daughters would stand, which is kind of all floppy because, teenagers, nothing much matters, right? If she was standing like this with her wand kind of down here somewhere, you would look at that poster and you would think, Voldemort's going to kill her. She's never going to survive this film. Feet shoulder width apart just portrays strength, confidence, capability. Emma Watson's a really good example, actually, because in her real life, she faces some really high pressure situations. She is a he for she ambassador for UNICEF. And she does these speeches to the United Nations to incredibly senior people. And she said in interviews how nerve-wracking that is and how terrified she is of doing that. So you see her very often, just have a look at these pictures here. When she wants to feel confident, she still looks absolutely beautiful and glamorous, but just notice what she's doing with her feet. They're shoulder width apart. I'm not saying she'd always stand like this. If she was doing like a Vogue magazine cover shoot, she would do something maybe more demure, but when she just needs to feel confident, notice what she does with her feet. So men and women, just get used to putting your feet shoulder width apart when you want to feel more confident and look more capable. I said I'd tell you why it makes you feel better as well. There was a study done a few years ago. You may have heard of this because it's the second most watched TED Talk of all time by Amy Cuddy. And Dr. Amy Cuddy ran an experiment to see whether if you changed the way you stood, it affected how you felt. And what she discovered is when she stood people in what she called power poses, so kind of she used the Wonder Woman pose or the victory pose, people started to feel better. In fact, what that graph there shows is of all the things that went on in their brain chemistry, cortisol started to drop straight away, and cortisol is the stress hormone. And conversely, when they made people stand small, taking up less space, maybe covering their body, the weakest position of all is the one where people touch their neck. So they call this the doctor's waiting room position. It's like when people are sitting there, they're tense and they're stressed. Their cortisol goes up and people feel more stressed. And yet typically, what do we do just before it's our big moment, right? Just before the presentation, we stand at the side of the stage and we're thinking, can I remember everything? You make yourself small. You're making yourself stressed. If it's not your turn yet in the meeting and you're sitting at a table, you tend to sit there and you huddle over your notes and you make yourself small. So you can learn from that advice and just spread out. If you take up more space with your feet shoulder width apart and open up your chest, we'll get to gestures in just a moment, you will start to feel more confident. You will start to relax, your cortisol level drops, and suddenly it feels okay to be at the front of the room. So you actually help yourself as well as helping your audience. So although it might feel a bit weird, just embrace getting your feet shoulder width apart. Don't go too far. Too far can look a bit cocky. We don't want kind of rock star or Ronaldo level. If you go too far, it can basically start to look a bit silly. So I'm not suggesting you go too far, but just kind of go with shoulder width apart and you'll look strong, you'll look centered, you'll look like you've got something to say. We wanted to just touch on how to get that pack leader presence when you're sitting. And it all comes from this thing. Do you remember we talked about the sternum, the chest plate? So there is a way of getting this same feeling for your audience when you're seated. So I'm going to just demonstrate it now. If you're in a sit-down meeting with people, or maybe a little one-to-one with somebody that you've got to get your message across to, how you sit during that meeting is completely up to you. There's no right or wrong way to sit in a chair, okay? Just relax, be yourself. But when it's your moment to give an important message, there's a little shift you can do here. And the shift is simple. I'll just show it to you sideways on so you can see what I'm doing. Basically, come to the front of your chair. So you might need to push your chair back a little bit. Get your bottom onto the front of the chair and plant your feet on the floor. The feeling we're going for here is that if you had to stand up, you could just stand up. You wouldn't need to go rah and push yourself out of the chair. That's the feeling we're going for. And importantly, the sternum lifts when you do that. When you sit back in a chair, it crunches up your abdomen and your sternum drops. When you come to the front, you lift your sternum and you look like you've got something to say. Suddenly you're the pack leader just with that little shift. So you just go from listening to people, and then when someone hands to you and says, oh, what was it you wanted to say? You just go, oh yeah, thanks very much. What I want to talk about is that, and that little shift just tells the audience you've got something to say. The sternum communicates a lot to other people, whether you're seated or standing. It comes from the Latin for basically breathing in and breathing out. Inspirare, expirare. So it's where we get the word inspire from. You know when someone is inspired, when someone's had a good idea, they go, and their sternum lifts. And also you know when someone has mentally expired from a meeting or a presentation because they go, and their sternum drops. I'm not suggesting you spend your entire presentation going, that would be weird. But when you do lift your sternum, it just tells your audience, this person's got something to say, and they'll listen. Do you remember we played the clip of the really old Superman film? And I just showed you how when Christopher Reeve was playing Superman, when he was in disguise as Clark Kent, sternum dropped. Quite a lot of unnecessary jangly movement going on. And then when he wanted to tell Lois Lane that he was actually Superman, Look at the difference. Okay, the glasses came off, but it's more than that. The sternum lifts. So don't go too far, don't be Iron Man, but when you want people to listen to your message, just get used to lifting the sternum, just give you a bit more presence. That's posture, that's the one we're going to spend the most time on. But let's work through the rest of these letters that we covered last year in Lesotho. So we started with P for posture. The L is for legs. And this is really quick because the message is simple with legs. Keep them still. Keep them still. When you're nervous and the adrenaline is rushing, your legs want to get involved. They want to help you out. We've got a fight or flight instinct that we've had since the dawn of time. And back then, we might have been facing a saber-toothed tiger in the jungle and we had a fight or flight instinct. Now, in 2018, we might be facing a room full of mammals, other humans looking at us, and all of those eyes trigger that fight or flight instinct all over again. And it's why we see people wandering, pacing, and people walk forwards because they think, yeah, I feel dynamic, I feel energized, but you're a bit scary. I'm just going to wander back and look at my screen for no reason, and then I'm going to come forward again because I'm feeling good about this, and then you're a little bit scary, so I'm just going to wander back again. And for the person doing it, they probably don't even realize they're doing it, and it does make them feel a bit better because it's burning a little bit of adrenaline and they feel like they've got somewhere for their energy to go. But for the audience, it becomes a big distraction. After a while, the audience are thinking, he's going to come forward again, isn't he? Here he comes. I bet he's going to go back again. He's going back again. Of course he is. And we get into this rhythm, which is very distracting. I'm not saying never move. You can move with a purpose. You can move to look at your screen if you're using one. You can move to look at a flip chart or whatever. That's fine. But when you want people to listen to your message, stand still. Remember I used the comparison of James Bond? So in the James Bond films, do you remember there's lots of movement in a James Bond film, right? There's running and jumping and chases and all sorts of stuff. But when James Bond delivers the key line, he's always standing still. It would be a weird James Bond film if when he met the villain for the first time, he said, "The name's Bond, James Bond," right? That doesn't happen. He stands still for the key moments. So if that helps you remember, use the same technique. Keep those legs still for people to hear your message. They're an unwanted distraction if you're moving around. That's L. Okay, where we do want movement is with these things, with arms. Now, the two things to remember about gestures, you might remember we covered this, is we need them to be congruent, there's that word again, so they need to make sense with what you're saying, and we need variety of gesture. If we don't have variety of gesture, it can just become a distraction. The movement needs to be necessary and it needs to make sense. Let me just show you this. Do you remember I played you this little clip from YouTube of Donald Trump and the squeeze box? When gestures don't have variety, they can be like this.
I don't like the way that looks, but I would be able to do that if I wanted to. I'd be the only one that would be able to do that. If we wanted to, I just don't want to because I think that would be a conflict. We're doing them a tremendous service by doing it. We are going to build a wall, and people will go crazy.
It makes me laugh. So there is actually a place for this gesture, the palms facing each other, but if we just did that all the time, it kind of makes no sense. These are very powerful visual aids, our hands. We can tell the audience quite a lot about how to feel about the message with the choices we make with these. You might remember we did that handshake exercise where everybody got up in that brilliant hall we were in, and we all went around the room shaking hands with each other, but in different ways. Do you remember you couldn't do your normal handshake? You either shook hands with your palm facing down or you shook hands with your palm facing up. And the reason for that was that handshakes have the same impact as gestures. It's a way of remembering what a palms down means and a palm up. Palms down, when it was in the handshakes exercise, it felt dominant. Do you remember? It felt like someone was being controlling. Whereas palms up feels more open and maybe a little bit more submissive when you're in the handshakes world. For when you're communicating with people, the same things are true. Palms down is for definitive, closed statements. This is fact. This has been the most successful project we have ever run. Fact, because my palm is down. Whereas if I go, this project has been amazing. Have you got any thoughts on how we could improve it? Has anyone got anything they'd like to share? Palms up is giving all the power to the other person, to the audience in this respect. You can also influence how the audience feels with these when any questions come in. Imagine if I was running a meeting, maybe I was proposing to try and get some more funding for a local clinic, and I had my figures on a screen. Suppose somebody in that meeting says, hang on a minute, Sim, are you sure these figures are right? I've got a couple of ways that I could answer that question. I could say, I'm absolutely sure these figures are right. Have you got any other questions? Any other questions? Or I could say, I'm absolutely sure these figures are right. Have you got any other questions? Any other questions? So the first way is basically saying, I'm not really that sure about these numbers. Please don't ask me anything. And the second way is saying, I've got this stuff nailed. You can ask me anything you like. The words are the same, but the hands tell a different story. Showing people the palm of your hand sometimes feels weird. Might be one of those things. The slight weirdness factor might creep in. You've done it in your private life. You do it all the time. If you're absolutely sure of something, you know, if, I don't know, your little niece or nephew is asking for more sweets, you might go, that's it. There are no more sweets today. You would do it. But it sometimes feels weird to do it when you're in a business setting and you're talking to people. So just try it, you know, just get used to trying it. Maybe have a little practice at home in front of a mirror. Just get used to showing people your palm. If you watch any of the great communicators, you know, Obama, for example, he was always kind of just like, I've got this idea. I reckon we should maybe do this. And showing people your palm is like, I've got this stuff sorted. This is going to be great. This is fact. The other thing to bear in mind about your hands is, what do we do with them when we're not gesturing? I get this question a lot, and it's a valid question, because when you're not in front of a room full of people, if you're just with your friends having a coffee or a chat, you never think about them. You don't go up to your friends going, all right, how are you? I don't know what I'm doing with these. These are really weird. You just don't think about it. You get on with it. But when you're in front of a room full of people staring at you, they suddenly feel weird. So there's a place to put your hands when you're not gesturing. And if you want to stand up and try this, if you're able to stand up wherever you are, just kind of adjust your screens or whatever, you might as well start trying to put this stuff into practice. So if you want to stand with your feet shoulder width apart, the place to put your hands is this. Clap them in front of you and bring them into your belly button or just above your belt buckle. This is your hand holster. This is where you rest your hands when you're not gesturing. I know it feels weird because in your normal life you don't stand like this and it's a new muscle memory. But welcome to TV presenter hands. Remember I showed you all these pictures? So BBC correspondents, you'll always see them standing like this when they're ready to talk. All TV presenters get used to standing like this. Next time you watch TV, just notice if they're standing up, where are they resting their hands? So although this might feel weird for you, you see it all the time and don't even notice it. It looks comfortable. Good communicators rest their hands in this position for a couple of reasons. Firstly, you look energized. You look like you've got something to say. You're burning a little bit of energy by holding them here. But more importantly than that, it's just better than all the other options. So the other options, I guess, are just leave them dangling by your side. You could do that. But then every gesture you do, whether it's palms up or palms down or out to the sides, you'll just flap like a penguin. So that's no good, really. Another one that a lot of people like is make a fist, put another hand on top of it and just rest it there. And this feels strong, right? This is a defensive position. This is how a doorman on a nightclub would stand, right? You're not coming in because you're actually protecting a vulnerable area. It's also that resting place I call the flashing fig leaf position, because any gesture you do from here will be way, drawing attention, woohoo, to a slightly way uncomfortable part of my body, and I don't really want to focus my attention down there. So Although it feels a bit odd, just try getting used to resting your hands here as your hand holster. And the final thing on gestures comes back to that Donald Trump thing. There is a place for when your palms face each other, and that is whenever you're talking about numbers. If you have any figures in your data, show the audience what those figures mean, what the context is of those numbers. Because if you were just delivering a project, say you were pitching to a group of people about a new project and you said, and we anticipate that this is going to benefit at least 20 new patients every month. Your audience are going to have to take a beat to go, is that good? Is that a big number? Or is that a small number compared to the number of patients we're currently treating? So help them out. Even if they're experts and you think, that's obvious, don't make them do the work. You're there to serve your message, to make the audience's life as easy as possible. So if 20 is a big number, just show it. 20 more patients a month could benefit from this. But if 20 is a disappointing number, we've done the sums and we think that actually 20 more patients, that's all we're going to benefit with all of this. Tell them. So we need to know whether the number's a big number or a small number. So be the human graph. And the final thing is get some width, get some air between your elbows and your sides. For most people, this is the horrible feeling. You've spent your life pretty much gesturing to one or two people. You know, you do, right? You're talking to friends. And so most of your gestures in your life have been about here, with your elbows safely tucked against the side of your body. If you bring this to the front of a room full of people, and you think, well, I'm going to do a bit of palms down, a bit of palms up, you end up with these weird T-Rex arms, and it looks odd. But here's the thing, it feels nice, because you're protecting yourself. I urge you to embrace the weirdness factor of letting the arms go. Get some space between the elbows and the sides of your body, because although this might feel horrible, you need to gesture to the size of the audience. You need to include everybody in the room with your gestures. I would recommend you practice this. Just get in front of a mirror and just look at yourself kind of going, okay, that feels okay. Oh, that actually looks all right. I could probably go there, because your brain needs to get reassured that it's okay to release the elbows. That's the final word on gestures. Let's just skip through these last few quite quickly and then we'll get to your questions. So remember, we're spelling plates. So we've had posture, legs, arms. The T is for tension. There's not too much to say on tension apart from it's all about balance. Too much tension is a bad thing. Tension spreads, it affects other parts of your body. It also spreads to the audience because people pick up on it. Too little tension, if you're all floppy, kind of just looks like you don't want to be there. So it's just about having a balance. A typical problem with tension is with this thing. I've put it in my pocket, but the clicker, the thing that's advancing my slide deck, a lot of people grip the clicker because it feels nice to hold on to something. There's a little subconscious element of your brain that's going, it's okay, I'm safe, I'm holding on to something. But the tension starts to spread. Quick example of how tension spreads. You can do this wherever in the world you're watching. Let's all do this little experiment together, wherever you are, sitting or standing. On the count of 3, I want you to scrunch up your toes as tightly as you can. 1, 2, 3. Have you stopped breathing? Okay, yeah, you can relax. I didn't say stop breathing, I said scrunch your toes. But when you scrunch your toes, the tension spreads up your legs into your diaphragm and you stop breathing. So that's an example of how it spreads through your body. Same thing happens if you're gripping a clicker or maybe a pen for a flip chart. It spreads up your arm, across your chest. You get that shallow clavicular breathing going on like in horror films. And suddenly your adrenaline is running and you don't know why, and you're in that horrible spiral. Quite often it's simply tension. So put the clicker down or put it in your pocket, free up your hands, have a bit of loose movement above the waist, and you'll start to feel a bit better. The E of plates is for these things. Eyes. Eye contact, importantly. Simply make some. You have to make eye contact with your audience. This is a bit of a leap of faith for some people. Some people find it really difficult to look their audience in the eye. The rule with eye contact, the guide for you is make it and then break it and make eye contact with someone else in the room. If you maintain eye contact with one person in the room for maybe 4 or 5 seconds, it gets a bit weird. We get into something called kiss or kill territory. We don't really want either of those things to be happening. So you need to share it out randomly. Don't kind of go around the room like this, but just randomly pick out somebody, share a thought with that person, and then break it and share the next thought with someone else. By maintaining eye contact on a personal level like that, your audience are much, much more likely to engage. The quickest way that audiences disengage with a speaker is lack of eye contact. If you're looking off because you're trying to remember your content, and that tends to happen to people, when the brain is searching for information, the eyes tend to wander off. So if you find yourself looking up, trying to remember what you're talking about, or if nerves get the better of you and your eye contact is so fast and scattered, you don't stay locked in on anyone for more than a fraction of a second, you start to look a bit scared, a bit shifty and untrustworthy again. And importantly, that's when people just disengage, because they know you're not really talking to them. You're just reciting some stuff. So that's when they think, oh, I'm safe to check my phone, check my emails, that's fine. But the moment you stay locked in on someone just for a couple of seconds, everybody wants a bit of that. Suddenly you're in the room and you're talking to them human to human. And that's when everybody focuses. So it might be a bit of a leap, but try to just get through that little uncomfortable hurdle of just looking people in the eye while your brain is still working and thinking about what you're going to say next. Final thing then, the S in plates is for smile. Hey! I don't mean you have to smile throughout your entire presentation, otherwise you'd look like you were on medication or something, and that would be a bit weird. But a smile at the start and a smile at the end is really, really useful. There's something called the primacy and recency effect with audiences. Audiences respond most strongly to the first thing they see and the last thing they see. So a smile at the beginning, hi everyone, thank you very much indeed for coming today, just reassures the audience that it's going to be a positive experience. And then a smile at the end, thanks very much indeed for your time, that's it from me, thank you. Just reassures them that it's all been good, and they'll leave that meeting thinking that was really positive. So try to remember to smile at the beginning, at the end. And I say that because under pressure, a lot of the time, your face just goes to like a poker face, goes stony faced. There's a little bit more to it than just smile. Really, it's about the whole face. Facial congruency is what we're looking for. There's that word again. We need your face to match the message. So if it's good news, you need to show that it's good news. This could help 20 more patients over the next month. This is fantastic. My face is telling you that. But similarly, if something is a challenge, we need to see it on your face. So you could stand up in front of an audience and say, we've had a really challenging time over the last month. The number of patients that have been able to get treatment at this clinic has fallen, and we're getting some really difficult pushback from the doctors. Or you could say, we've had a really challenging time over the last month. The number of patients that have been treated has fallen, and we're getting some really difficult pushback from some doctors. Suddenly my face is telling you how much this is a problem, and you start to feel it. The reason that happens is because all humans have something called mirror neurons in our head. So we can see an expression on a face, even in animals. You take apes, they've got hairless faces. You could look at a picture of an ape and think, yeah, looks like he's pondering life, the universe and everything. Or maybe the orangutan looks like he's horrified that he's in a green jumper. But it's why when you watch your friends watching TV, for example, you quite often see the emotion on screen mirrored on their face. About 50% of humans physically mirror the emotion they're seeing, but all humans feel it. So show your audience with your face how you want them to feel about this part of the message. Basically, tell your face. And that is our plates. P-L-A-T-E-S. Posture, get yourself centered, feet shoulder width apart. Legs, keep them still unless you're moving for a reason. Arms, we need a bit of variety with these gestures and a bit of width as well. And then tensions, just having a balance of tension. Put down things that you're gripping onto for fear of dear life. Eyes, make eye contact with your audience, even though that might feel a bit difficult to start with. You'll soon get used to it. And then finally, smile. But that's all about the face as well. So make sure your face matches the message. We've got time for a couple of questions just before we wrap up this little recap session. Well, we're gonna have my little production team are off camera over here. Are we gonna have the first one from Oz? All right, let's have a look at this.
Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing well. So in Lesotho, we talked about how to stand, how to use our hand gestures, and how to control our voices while giving speeches. My question is, what can we do to prepare ourselves before the speech? Because I usually get really nervous right before I start my speech or get on the stage, and I completely forget everything I know, and it takes me a couple of minutes to actually calm myself. And I usually have a couple of awkward moments at the beginning of the speeches. I want to ask if there is any tips you can give me to avoid having those awkward moments. Bye!
Oh man, it's so good to see you again, Oz. It's so nice to see your smiling face. Hi man. Great memories of last year. And a really, really good question. I'm so glad you're starting to use the stuff that we talked about last year when you're presenting to people. And I hear from my colleagues here at Spark that you're doing brilliantly, man. I'm so proud of you. You're meeting aren't you meeting royalty sometime soon? That's fantastic. Anyway, to answer your question, absolutely this is normal to still feel those nerves before the big event, and then to kind of let that interfere with your mindset and where you are. So there's a couple of really simple tips that I would give you to try and overcome this. The first is that no presentation is a memory test, all right? You don't have to go on that stage with no notes at all. You can have notes with you. In the later sessions, I'm going to be reminding you of the scripting structure that we talked about. You know when you make a grid on a piece of paper? If you can take that simple grid with you and just put it somewhere that you can glance down at, we did a little trigger word version when we were together. I would say take that with you as a little security blanket so you can just glance down at it and remember where you are in your presentation. I do understand though that if you're on an open stage and there's no podium and there's absolutely kind of no auto cue or anything, it's a challenge. So here's my little bit of advice for you. First of all, practice, rehearse. If you don't get a chance to rehearse the whole thing, at least practice the beginning. If you practice the opening minute or two of your presentation to the point where, excuse me, you can literally do it off the top of your head, at least you know when you walk out onto that stage that you've got that bit nailed. And you've already said that after a couple of minutes you kind of calm down and you start to get back in your stride, and that's completely normal. That's because all of that adrenaline and tension starts to kind of subside because your body goes, oh, I'm all right, I remember how this works. No one's gonna have a go at me or anything. I'm safe up here. And you start to relax. So give yourself that first 2 minutes of security just by rehearsing it a few times so you know it. And the other thing that you can do, I don't know if we had time to talk about this, Oz, when we were together in Lesotho, but there's a breathing exercise you can do which will help you before you go on. And in simple terms, it's just slow down your breathing and do that thing that, remember the Superman clip that I played when we were together? That breathing out. So, you know, sometimes people say just before you go on to do something nerve-wracking, they say, take a deep breath. That's actually terrible advice. Don't take a deep breath because it just builds loads of tension and pressure up here and you end up with that shallow breathing. It's the opposite of that. So, breathe out. You see sports stars do it. You never see a tennis player like Roger Federer or Andy Murray, just before they serve, you never see them go, it'd be terrible. Or golfers kind of go, they don't do that, they do the opposite. They go, and then they do what they're going to do. So when you're off stage there, just breathe out, let it sit there just for a couple of seconds, and then just let the air rush back into your lungs and fill it up down to your abdomen here, down to your diaphragm. Hold it for a few seconds. Breathe out for a few seconds. Hold it. Let the air come back in. And just repeat that pattern of pushing the air out right from your diaphragm and letting it sit for a few seconds. You'll slow your heart rate, your adrenaline level will drop, and you should feel a lot better before you walk out on stage. I've given you a whole few little things there. Start trying those, Oz, and let us know how you get on. Thanks for the question, man. Any other questions? We're all good. All right, in that case, I'm going to wrap up this recap session. There are 2 more from me still to come today. In the next 10 minutes or so, we're going to start the next one. So we've got a recap session on structuring your content, so writing, getting your script in order to make it the most influential script it can be, to try and get your audience to go with you with an idea. And then later on, we will do a recap on the writer's tools that you can use to make all of that content a bit more memorable and a bit more engaging for your audience. So 2 more sessions to come. Hopefully I'll see you at the next one. From me for this one, that's it. Goodbye. Hello, welcome to this Spark recap session on writing and structuring your content in a way that is absolutely the most engaging it can be for your audience. We're going to look into how you can get your big complex idea into a really simple to understand structure that your audience will hook into, and then ideally it'll persuade them to go with you on your idea. We're looking at how to influence our audience. It's a recap on something we did at the camp in Lesotho last year. For those who haven't met me, a quick reminder, I work for a company called Body Talk. My name is Simeon Corti. My background was in broadcasting as a radio presenter, then a television presenter, but then I moved into writing and I wrote comedy for TV shows and then wrote a couple of books, and those books formed some of them were fiction, and the one that you can see on screen there is an account of me traveling around the world with my family. But in every case, what I've had to learn is how to make a big, complex story really simple and engaging for audiences, and that's what I'm going to share with you now. We'll have time for questions at the end of this recap session, so if you're watching the live version, then I would love to hear from you. If you've got any thoughts or any observations on what we do here over the next 20 minutes or so, just write a quick message in the comments section underneath the video. We'll see it here, and then I'd be really happy to talk to you and answer your questions at the end. Before we get into scripting though, there's a really essential thing that we need to talk about. We did this when we met last year. It was to do with how our audience feel. Remember, we talked a lot about feelings. It's to do with recognizing that our audience, whoever they are, anywhere in the world, they have 2 different things going on in their brains. They've got the emotional brain, which is technically called the limbic system. That's the biggest part of a brain. And then there's the logical brain, the neocortex, which sits on top. And the most effective communication talks to both, gets the emotional part of the brain and the logic part of the brain agreeing with each other, basically, and going in the same direction. A really simple analogy that I used when we were together last year is an elephant and a rider. And this basically represents the brain of your audience. The elephant being the emotional part of the brain, and the rider on top being the logical part of the brain. So if you imagine the elephant and the rider, who's in charge of that relationship? You might think the rider, because he's trained the elephant and he's sitting on top and he might have a little stick or something. But ultimately, if there was a fire or a gunshot or something, the elephant is in charge. The elephant is not going to go down a path that it doesn't want to go down. The elephant needs to trust the rider before it will go in that direction. And the same is true with your audience's brains. The emotional part of their brain needs to be on board, needs to go, yes, I like this, how do we do it? And then it lets the logic get involved. So this writing structure absolutely taps into that, trying to get the audience emotionally bought in before we hit them with all the logic of our idea or our proposal. What I'm going to teach you over this next 20 minutes isn't brand new. It's not something that I've made up or concocted. It actually dates back thousands of years. Because if you think about how humans used to pass on important messages to each other before we had emails or Snapchat or PowerPoint presentations, they did it through storytelling. That's how people passed on information that they wanted others to remember and pass on to other people beyond that. So we're going to tap into the basic framework of storytelling with our day-to-day content, with our presentations or the ideas that we're taking to a meeting of other people. The storytelling framework I'm going to share with you dates back pretty much as far as human beings can remember. So the first example of humans carving a story into stone, so using text for the first time to tell a story, which was the legend of Gilgamesh about 4,500 years ago, uses this structure. Greek tragedies do it, Shakespeare plays do it, Hollywood blockbusters do it, TV commercials do it, really successful business presentations do it, and I'm going to share it with you now, so hopefully you can start doing it as well and seeing the influence it has on your audience. The reason this storytelling structure is so compelling for audiences is it taps into a really basic human emotion, an instinct we all have of avoiding pain and seeking pleasure. You might remember we talked about this. So we need to tap into that sort of instinct with our structure. There's a really, really simple way of doing this. We have a grid. You might have this in your workbooks if you've still got your Spark workbook. But if not, you can just grab a piece of paper right now if you've got one handy and draw a little grid of 4 boxes on it. And we call this structure the pro writing structure because we've got 5 of these pros. These are words we're going to fill in as we go. You work around this structure in a clockwise direction, you probably remember, so you start up here and you work your way around. And this box down here, box 3 if you like, 1, 2, 3, that's where all of the meaty detail of your meeting goes. It's these top 2 boxes that are really important for tapping into the emotions, and this is where we tap into that pain-pleasure instinct that all humans have. If you imagine kind of at the dawn of time, early cavemen foraging in the forest, if they came across a saber-toothed tiger, for example, they had a couple of choices. They could either recognize the pain that that mouth looks like with all those teeth, or they could seek pleasure and seek a bit of safety hiding in a tree. Now, they wouldn't all have recognized the pain and the pleasure. Some would have just wandered up to the saber-toothed tiger and maybe thought it would be a nice pet to take home to the cave for the kids. And they were the people that would have been eaten. So essentially, we have all evolved from humans who realize the importance of avoiding pain and seeking pleasure. So that's what storytelling taps into right at the start. So the first thing we need to do for our audience is bring to their attention a modern day saber-toothed tiger, effectively, in the form of a problem. Just to be clear, this isn't an excuse for you to start your presentation or your meeting with a big old whinge and a moan. It's not about a problem for you. This is a problem that your audience can identify with. So to give you a quick example, I'll use an example that actually is from Spark last year in South Africa. So one of the delegates there was working with me and using this to try and persuade in her local community the people on the council responsible for funding clinics. She was trying to persuade them that if they treated HIV patients earlier when their CD count was lower, it would actually have a benefit not just to the patients because they wouldn't get ill, but it would actually save them money further down the line, because they were waiting till people were so ill before they started treating them that it was costing them a fortune for long-term treatment, and they were using up loads of hospital appointments and loads of clinic time. So her idea was a really sound idea, but her first instinct with regard to the problem was to talk about the problem that she was having and the problem that the patients were having. And patients aren't being seen, and when they are being seen, they can't get an appointment, and it's really frustrating for them. The clinics are full and the doctors are getting fed up, and it's costing a fortune. And it was all a bit of a from her point of view. So what we did is we just switched it and put ourselves in the audience's shoes. So the very first thing you need to do before you start writing your content, before you start putting your thoughts on paper, is think, who's my audience? Who am I talking to? Because I need to tap into their emotional brains, not my own. So in that example, she was able to say, we have a really big challenge in our community. As you are aware, the clinics are swamped. It's really difficult for people to get appointments, and you're getting complaints about that all the time. Worse, you're not just getting complaints from patients, you're getting complaints from doctors, because the doctors are frustrated that the funding is stretched, they haven't got the funds necessary to effectively treat the patients they're getting, and the hospitals are really full. So they're working extra hours and they're getting frustrated as well. Ultimately, if we don't address this now, the situation's only going to get worse. We're going to see doctors leaving because the work is impossible. We're going to see patients unable to get treatment, and it's ultimately going to be landing on your doorstep. So suddenly the people in the room feel like, right, this is a problem and I need to address it. So what she had done there is tap into 3 really vital areas that you need to start looking for in your content. Do you remember we talked about MTV? It's easy to remember because of the music television channel, but in communication terms, these stand for money, time, and the V is values. Not value as in value for money, human emotions, the values we have as human beings. So things like, it's hard, it's frustrating, it's difficult, I'm fed up. Or if it's to do with a company, reputational damage. These are all V words. So she had successfully tapped into the fact that for the audience, this was costing them money, it was wasting time, and it was frustrating for them and for the people involved. Ultimately, their reputation was going downhill. Now, at this point, a lot of presentations whiz down here to box 3 and reveal the solution and say, it's okay though, I've got a way of fixing this, and they click the PowerPoint and away they go. But we're not going to get into the logic part yet. We're going to do something else first. We're going to move across here. After we've identified what the challenge or the risk or the hurdle is that the audience can relate to, we're then going to suggest to them a future, a promise that looks a whole lot better. Now, when I say promise, I don't mean a cast iron promise. This is not where you say, I absolutely guarantee that if you do my plan, you'll get this, this, and this. It's not that sort of promise. By promise, I mean like the promised land, you know, like a golden future. Wouldn't it be great if the world was like this? You're not saying you'll definitely get there, but that's the future that you're aiming for. And the way you do that is by mirroring what you've put in this box here. So if you're writing one of these with me now on a piece of paper, in box 2, just write down the positive M, T, and V. Positive money, time, and values. So for instance, in that example from Spark last year, if she was able to say regarding T, time, in box 1, patients are sometimes having to wait 2 months to get treated because the appointment system is so full. When she comes over here, she's able to say, what if patients could be seen within a matter of days? Think how good that would be for your reputation as a healthcare provider. I've also got a way that we can start saving you a lot of money. Your budget will go further. She hasn't said how yet. That's the important thing. You don't say how you're going to achieve these big picture goals, but you just tell the audience what those big picture goals are with relation to money, time and values. You might not always get all three. Some of your content might be clearly just related to money. Some of it might be clearly just related to time. My feeling is any presentation has V in it because human emotions are always available to talk about. So maybe it's frustration, in which case you're going to make things easy. If there's a lack of clarity, maybe what you're going to do is give people a bit of clarity, give people some confidence about where we're going with this idea. So never overlook the V. But you'll know from your content, whether it's a proposal or an idea, which of these things it's worth talking about. So you just mirror them. You talk about the challenges in box 1, you talk about this golden future, and you link it with a useful linking phrase. So in that example at Spark last year, she was able to say, what if we had a way that patients could be seen in just a few days, that the system had more money in it, and that your reputation as a healthcare provider was boosted. Now, that what if phrase is flexible. You can put it in your own words, but I'm going to write it down, and you can do the same if you're writing your own one of these, as a reminder that you need to link from box 1 to box 2 with an obvious contrast. You could say, imagine though, or what I'm aiming for, anything like that, that links you from the dark, bad world to the ultimate brilliant world. And that contrast between the two is really, really important. There's a way to get that contrast as defined as possible. Do you remember I told you the story of the camel test? All right, I'll just remind you of it. Basically, a traveller is walking through the desert and he comes across a camel on the side of the road, and he says the camel is moaning and groaning, it's making all sorts of horrible camel noises. And the traveller says to the camel's owner, what is wrong with your camel? And the owner says, oh, him, he's sitting on a rock. That's why he's moaning. The traveller says, well, why doesn't he get up off the rock and move? And the owner says, I guess the rock is not sharp enough. It's not sharp enough to make the camel get up and move. And we all know people like that, right? People who will moan and complain and whinge, but they'll never change anything because the rock's not really sharp enough to make them do it. Sometimes whole organizations are like that. We'll go into a company and maybe they'll moan about the IT system being slow and it crashes all the time. 6 months later, I'll go back into that organization and they'll still be moaning about it because it would take the IT system to completely crash and burn before anyone fixes it. The rock isn't sharp enough. So what we need to do in box 1 is sharpen the rock for our audience. We need to make it as uncomfortable as possible so that our audience recognize they need to effectively, like camels, get up and move. And it's not enough just to get them up because then they'll wander in their own direction. Your promise needs to be so obviously alluring, there's only one direction to move in. So think about how you can sharpen the rock. That's a sharp rock I've drawn there. How can you sharpen the rock for your audience? There's a really useful writer's technique for doing this, and that is to project into the future. So what might happen if we don't address this now? So drill down to the future impact. In that example I gave from Spark last year, she was able to say, ultimately, and you can use that word if you want to, you don't have to. Ultimately, if we don't make a change, doctors are going to start leaving because they can't face this workload. If we don't make a change, patients won't be getting treated at all. So you're not saying this is happening now. You're just saying this is what could happen in the future if we don't make a change. That's a really useful way of sharpening the rock. Writers do this all the time. In movies, you might have you seen this? This is an Oscar-winning film, The King's Speech. So in simple terms, this film, whether you've seen it or not, I'll just explain it to you. The man on the left of that picture there is a prince, and he's about to become the King of England. But he can't speak very well. He has a speech impediment, he has a stammer, so he stutters when he speaks. That's the problem. So we've got a really rich man who lives in a palace, surrounded by servants, and he's got a speech impediment. It's not that big a problem for me, sitting in the cinema. I'm thinking, oh, so what? You know, he's rich, he'll live with it. So the writers do some rock sharpening. The film is set at the dawn of the Second World War. So someone in the film basically explains that we've got a man who could become king. If he becomes king, he needs to be able to rouse the nation for war. There's a guy in Germany who's brilliant at speaking, and he is raising an army for war. If our man can't make a speech, we could lose the war. They even say it in the film. None of that has happened at the moment, but that's where we're going. So it's sharpening the rock for the audience. Now we get it and now we care. So look at your own content and think, is the challenge just a little bit of a so what? If it does feel a little bit so what, sharpen the rock a little bit. Think, how can I make this even more uncomfortable? And maybe projecting to the future is the way to do that. Once you've got these two things sorted, we get into the detail. But a quick example of where this has been used, not just in storytelling in films, but in business as well, every single Apple launch did this. So you take the iPod as an example. When Steve Jobs first launched the iPod, way back when in the early 2000s, MP3 players already existed. He hadn't invented the MP3 player, and he didn't just walk on stage and start here saying, ladies and gentlemen, let me show you the iPod, this is how it works. He started up here and talked about the problems of being a music lover. The problem of being a music lover is we all use CDs. Because that was true. MP3 players weren't that popular at that time. He talked about the size of it. It can only hold 15 tracks. He talked about the frustrations of them, a V word. If you want to get the perfect song for the perfect moment, you have to search through hundreds of cases looking for it, and then when you open it, the disc's not in there. He talked about the cost. I'm paying for a whole album. I only want 2 tracks on it. The time it takes to find that music. And then he said, what if you could find your music instantly, buy songs for a few cents, and have all your music with you all the time? What if you could have 1,000 songs in your pocket? Pulled out the iPod, and then we're ready. Then as an audience we're hooked in and we go, yes, that solves all my problems. So we're going to try and do the same thing here with a problem promise setup, and only then do we reveal the title of our project, basically. So you can put your title at the top of box 3 of your project or whatever it is you're there to talk about. This is where you reveal it. The problem with this box here is this is where all your data, your detail goes, all your graphs and things, and that can be quite unwieldy for an audience. So I'm going to help you make it easy for the audience. We're also going to fill in 2 more pro words in this box. The 2 pros that we're going to do in box 3 are process and proof. The process is the steps we're going to take to try and get to this golden future. Proof is some evidence that it's going to work, all right? There are loads of ways that you can weave both of those into your content, but they're the 2 elements that we need to see as an audience. We need to see how we're going to get there, and we need reassurance that it is going to work. With regard to the volume of the content you've got, and you've got loads of detail, you need to make it easy for your audience. So the trick here is to break it down into simple subheadings. 3 is ideal. It doesn't have to be 3, but we love the rule of 3. It's hard to remember things in more than 3s. So it's hard to remember all of Father Christmas's reindeer or all of the 7 dwarfs, but we remember things in 3s. So I'm not saying only talk about 3 things. I'm saying look at all of your content and think, how can I group it into 3 different areas and give each of those areas a simple, small title, like a subheading. That's what you're aiming to do, so that you can announce at the top of box 3, when you've stated what your idea is, you can say, there are just 3 things that I want to talk about in this meeting. So in that example from Spark last year, she was able to say, after she'd done her problem and the promise, she was able to say, I think we can have all that if we fund HIV patients' treatment earlier to relieve the pressure on clinics further down the line. That's her big idea. In this meeting, I'm just going to talk to you about how it works, the costs involved, and where it's worked somewhere else. And as an audience, we think, great, it's only 3 things, I can handle that. And then you go back to number 1 and do it in full. So you announce the signposts at the beginning, and then you go back and start talking through all your content. Because that way the audience know the journey we're going on, and they relax and they stay focused. So the rule of 3 is a great one if you can go for it. The Steve Jobs example, when he launched the iPod does hundreds of things, right? But he said there's only 3 things to talk about: how it's a music player, how it's a phone, and how it gets on the internet. Within each of those, he talked for ages. I think he spent 90 minutes in box 3. But as an audience, we think, great, it's only 3 things, and we stay focused. Storytelling does it all the time. Aladdin rubs his lamp and gets how many wishes? 3. There are loads of nursery rhymes regarding 3 things. 3 little pigs, the 3 billy goats gruff, Goldilocks and the 3 bears. How many musketeers are there? Yeah, it's a weird one, the musketeers, isn't it? Because there are 4 of them. But they call it D'Artagnan and the 3 musketeers, because we like things in 3s. So try, if you can, to get your content subdivided into 3 different categories. At the very end of box 3, there's one more thing to do. Because you will have spent quite a lot of time here, you just need to recap what you've covered in that meeting. So I'm going to write recap at the bottom. A recap is not do the whole thing again. A recap is just reminding people what these subheadings were. So you basically say, after you've talked about everything, you say, just to sum up then, we've talked about how my idea works, we've talked about the costs involved in that idea, and we've talked about where it works somewhere else. You don't have to have process and proof as separate headings like that. You can have step 1, step 2, and step 3, but within those you can offer some proof in there. So there's any number of ways of mixing those things up, process and proof, but just make your 3 different areas nice and clear for the audience. Now, a lot of business meetings would end there, but we're not going to do that, because you'll have built up some nice momentum here. You know, if you've done this well, the audience definitely want to know how they're going to get to that. You've told them how they're going to get to it. But don't stop there. You've probably seen meetings that do, and people kind of get to the end of their presentation or their last slide and they click and they go, and that's it, thank you. Oh, any questions? It's all a bit awkward. We're not going to do that. We're going to do one more thing. We're going to offer our audience a final pro in the form of a prompt. A prompt is a little nudge to the audience about what's going to happen next. What's the simple next step that's going to happen? Now, ideally, this simple next step would be timed. So when do you want it doing by? But most crucially, it needs to be small. It needs to be simple, and it needs to feel safe. The audience need to feel they can take that step, and it's okay. They could always come back from it if they wanted to. So this would not be the moment in our example from Spark last year. This would not be the moment for her to say, so all I need from you is funding for all the clinics to start giving treatment to all the patients with a lower CD count. Thank you. It's too big. They're not going to take that on board. It's too big. It's too risky. Instead, you offer them a small step. Even better, if you want to be really persuasive, and this is about influencing people, offer your audience 2 alternative choices. Not step 1, then step 2. Choice. We could do this, or we could do this. Because people love choice. Nobody likes to feel bulldozed into anything. So you could say, in that example, we could say, there are a couple of things we could do next, really. Either I could invite someone from one of those other clinics to come and meet you all and describe how they started this process. Or if you're confident with the idea, we could just trial this in one of our local clinics, see how it goes over the first few months, and then take a view after that. It's up to you. Either one of those gets your idea one step further to happening. So don't make the step too big. Final thing then, and I put this on even though it seems obvious, but so many people forget to do it. The final thing is to say thank you. But say thank you twice. I don't mean thank you. That would be weird. I mean thank you, blah, 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 thank you. The first thank you alerts the audience that you're coming to the end and their attention peaks. The second thank you is the full stop. So what you say in between those is completely up to you. You could say, thanks very much indeed for your time today. I've got time for some questions. I would love to have your thoughts on everything I've talked about, and we've got time to debate it. But as far as the presentation goes, that's it from me. Thank you. Or you could remind them what these were. You could say, thanks so much for your time today. I really think that if we start this process, we'll see more money in the budget for treatments and happier doctors and happier patients. Thank you. Could do that. You've got choices. But thank you, blah, 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 thank you is the strongest way to end your presentation. And that is the pro-writing structure. Quick examples of where you've seen it, not just in TV commercials, because they do it all the time. You'll start to notice it now, but movies do it. Do you know what the biggest grossing movie is of all time? I use this just because we've all got our own taste. So I went to the top 10 movies in the box office ever. And the number 1 box office movie ever is this one, Avatar. I know, who knew? Well, so take Avatar as an example. If you've seen the film, you will know that it's not really about the blue alien things. It is eventually, but not at the start. At the start, it's about that bloke you can see on the right-hand side of the picture there. Now, he starts the movie in a slightly unusual position for a hero of a film, in that he's in a wheelchair. Now, this isn't necessarily the problem box until we discover what his job was. And his job is he was a soldier. So he's a soldier who's lost the use of his legs. Problem. We also discover in the first 5 minutes that he's just been bereaved. His brother has just died. Worse than that, his twin brother has just died. It's like the writers are going, right, so we've got a soldier, he's lost the use of his legs, yeah, that's bad. His brother's just died, yeah, that's pretty bad. They're sharpening the rock all the time. Worse than that, his twin brother has just died. Anything to make the problem horrible for this hero. Then a man comes along and says, how would you like to run again? To finish the work of your dead brother? And, by the way, save the world. And he says, yes, please, send me to Pandora. And then he gets on with the journey and we see if he can achieve all of that stuff. So movies do it all the time. If you're a Star Wars fan, every single Star Wars film starts in the same way. What do they do at the beginning of a Star Wars film? The text crawl, going up the screen. Once upon a time in a galaxy far, far away, you know the way it starts? I'm paraphrasing here, but you know what I'm talking about. Next time you watch a Star Wars film, just notice this. Paragraph 1 of that crawl of text up the screen is box 1. Paragraph 2, the music changes. And we get box 2, about what we're aiming for. And then paragraph 3 is the first step of the process. So Princess Leia is sending a daring pilot on a mission, or whatever it might be. So in every Star Wars film, you get box 1, box 2, and box 3 before you even see an actor. So Hollywood's doing it all the time. Every superhero film does it. This is the highest grossing superhero film of all time, The Dark Knight. If you've seen it, does it start with Batman? It does not. It starts with this guy, Heath Ledger playing the Joker, being despicable. He's shooting bank tellers, he's killing bank clerks, he's even killing his own henchmen, he's being awful. Because only when we've got a villain is there any need for a hero to take us to a better future. It would be a pretty weird superhero film if it started with a bloke in a rubber suit walking around Gotham City going, "Anyone got any problems? Anyone? No? Oh, I'll be here if you need me." You know, that'd be weird. Every single superhero film starts with the problem. We need to feel the problem before there's any reason to aim for a better future. So what I would urge you to do is the next time you've got a presentation or a meeting, resist the urge to open the laptop and start making a PowerPoint presentation. Simply get a piece of A4 paper, make a grid of 4 boxes, and follow this pro plan. If you want to start writing in box 3, then that's great. Just think, what is my idea? What is it basically I'm there to tell them about? That goes there. How could I group it into simple headings? And then you could go, right, what problem for my audience is this solving? And just mirror it to say, wouldn't it be great if, and you just tell them the opposites, if we saved that much money, or we saved that much time, or people felt happier, or just life was easier, whatever it might be. I think we can achieve that by doing this. And then a simple next step for your audience. It doesn't have to be 2, but 2 if you want to be really persuasive, come up with choices. In the next recap session, we're going to look at how to make this box even more engaging, because you could spend a long time here. The time split up of this is basically 75% of your time at least is spent here. This is quite brief, like 10%, 10% at the most. See this as the intro to your meeting, these 2 boxes. This is the meeting kind of proper, where you turn the PowerPoint on and get on with it. So this bit can take a long time. I'm going to show you how to make this bit more memorable in the next session. Quick check-in with my production team. We're happy to wrap this up. All right, hopefully I'll see you at the next recap, which is going to be in about 10 minutes time from now, where we'll look at what those different writers' tools are to keep your audience hooked in and help them remember the information you share with them in this box here. So hopefully I'll see you then. But from me for now, bye-bye. Hello, welcome along to this Spark recap session on how to make your writing more engaging for your audience. You know what the challenge is when you're putting together your presentation for a group of people. The detail part of that presentation can be quite long in time. It might last 10 minutes, it might last half an hour, and the danger is that people start kind of disengaging, they lose focus, and they don't remember the key part of your message and take it with them. So we're going to give you a whole bunch of tools that will help you achieve that. We did do this in Lesotho last year. For those of you who weren't in that session or don't remember who I am, my name is Sim. I'm Simeon Corti. I work for a company called Body Talk. My background is in broadcasting. First of all, I started in radio about 26 years ago, a very long time, working in BBC Radio, and I do still work on BBC Radio in the UK. Then I worked in television. And then I moved to writing, so I would write for comedy programs on BBC television, and I also wrote a comedy travel memoir called The Long and Winding Road, which was the grand prize winner at the London Book Festival in 2012. So the skills I'm going to share with you over this next 20 minutes or so really relate to writing and how to make sometimes quite a big, complicated bunch of information a bit more sticky. You know, so it stays in people's minds and they take it with them and hopefully act on it and pass it on to other people. You may remember the session from last year. We call it the pitch session because each tool starts with a letter and it spells the word pitch. If you would like to grab a piece of paper now you can start writing these down as we go. We're going to play our own little game of hangman as we go through these words here. You may be looking at them already and trying to work out what these words might be. So grab a piece of paper and a pen if you want to remember these tools. And if you have any questions about anything I'm talking about over the next 20 minutes or so, I would love to hear from you. Happy to answer questions. So you've got the little comment section just below the video. Just get typing if you've got an observation or a thought or a question. Type it in there. Even if you're not watching the live session, the guys at Spark will forward it to me and hopefully we'll be able to help you out. So do interact if you would like to. Okay. The first of these writers' tools then that is commonly used to get the audience to engage more with a message begins with P. Before I tell you what the word is, a couple of examples of where you might have seen it. If you ever stay in a hotel, you go into the bathroom and you normally see a little sign in the bathroom that looks a bit like this. It's one of those little signs that says, please recycle your towels because it will save the planet. Use your towel again. Of course, the hotel is also doing it because it saves them money on laundry, right? Now, an interesting experiment was done with these signs across a group of hotels in North America by a psychologist called Dr. Robert Cialdini. He wrote a really famous book called Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. And as part of his research into what influences people, he teamed up with a group of hotels and they changed the wording on these signs. So instead of just being a fairly straightforward sign saying, please can you reuse your towels, the sign wording changed to say, most people who stay in this hotel reuse their towels. Now bear in mind that previously about half the people had reused their towels, about 50% of people. Once they changed the wording to say most people who stay in this hotel reuse their towels, that number went up to over 70%. Well, the hotel chain were pleased, obviously, but that wasn't the end of the experiment. So Dr. Cialdini said, no, that's only part one. Part two of the experiment is we changed the wording again. And the wording changed to become, most people who stay in your room in this hotel reuse their towels. And the number of people who chose to reuse their towels went up again to about 86%. Now, if you bear in mind that some people won't even see the sign or read the sign, that's probably about as close as you're going to get to everyone doing it as you're going to get. So have a think about what tool he's using there that begins with P. I'll give you another quick example. There's a charity, a worldwide charity called Save the Children. You might have heard of them. And Save the Children used to raise a lot of their money with mail outs, so they would post little envelopes out to people, they'd put them through their door, and on the envelope would be printed some information, and they hope that people will put some money in and post it back. The kind of information that they put on the envelopes was something like this. Then the charity teamed up with a team from Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh who wanted to help them. And they said, on the next mail out, add this. And donations went up by 25%. So the charity were delighted, of course, and they said, oh, this is great. So the more information we put on the envelope, the more money we get in. And the team from Carnegie Mellon University said, no, we don't think that's what's happening. On the next mail out, just put this. And donations doubled. So what tool are they using that begins with a P, that gets people hooked in and gets those effects? You're probably already there. It is personal. Make your message personal. So there are a couple of ways of doing this. The quick and easy way of getting some personal engagement with your audience is to tell a story. Stories give facts a soul. So where you can, in your presentation or in your meeting, tell a story to demonstrate something, whether that's a problem or whether it's a goal or whether it's part of the process of how you want to achieve it. Because in storytelling, we give facts a soul. It becomes personal. The reason it's worth trying to make some of your message personal is because it can make very big, complicated things suddenly seem simple to understand. It's why advertisers do it. So in the UK, for a charity, you might see an advertising hoarding like this. 5-year-old Elsa has a drink problem. £3 could give a child like her safe water today. Now, this is taking something big and complex, which is famine or drought, and suddenly making it seem easier to understand, because we can understand it from her point of view. It doesn't always have to be about pulling on heartstrings, though. It can be really simple. So another example, in the UK, we have these signs now that have appeared when motorways have roadworks. So you know what it's like if there's roadworks going on, there's cones everywhere and all the drivers are cross and frustrated because it's slowing them down. So they've started putting these signs up. My daddy works here. Take care within the roadworks. In the hope that I suppose you're driving along and you think, well, I guess they are human beings, and it suddenly makes it something we can relate to and encourages us to maybe slow down and not take so many risks driving through the roadworks. So it can be a very powerful tool to engage an audience, to suddenly make a very big problem seem quite simple to understand. Even if it's just an account from your own life, you can say, I'm going to share with you something I encountered when I was first looking at getting some treatment. When I went to the doctor, this happened, that happened, and suddenly people will give you the time, they won't interrupt you, and the whole thing seems so much more real to them. So that's the first really powerful tool to make your information engaging for an audience. Make it personal. The second tool begins with I. Before I fill it in, another story for you. This is the story of a man called Art Silverman. It's a great name. Art Silverman, back in the 90s, worked for an organisation called the Centre for Science in the Public Interest. And they still exist. They're on Facebook these days. And the job of the Centre for Science in the Public Interest is to alert members of the public to any scientific stories that might affect them. And Art Silverman's job was to try and educate the American public to eat more healthily. So good luck with that, Art. And as part of his job, he found out that cinema popcorn had an enormous amount of saturated fat in it. Huge. So doing his job, he wrote a press release and he sent it out to all the newspapers and the TV shows and the radio shows. And the press release was something like this. It was full of the data, the facts, all the detail about how much nutritional content was in popcorn. And you can see there's a little bit that might be important because it's in bold, and we don't know whether that's a big number or a small number. And as you'd expect, the story died. It didn't go anywhere. It had no traction at all. Nobody printed it, nobody reported it. But Art Silverman had a second chance. He called a press conference and invited journalists. And at the press conference, he ditched all of that data, all of those facts, and he did something entirely different. To a room full of journalists, he said, one box of cinema popcorn has the same amount of saturated fat as a full English breakfast. The same amount of saturated fat as a McDonald's Big Mac meal. The same amount of saturated fat as a steak dinner with all the trimmings combined. And the journalists kind of reeled and went, what? And suddenly the story had traction. It was reported everywhere. It was all over the Late Show and the Leno Show, and all the newspapers ran it. I was working in a BBC newsroom back in the 90s, and I remember this story. So it must have gone global. So big was the outrage about the fat in cinema popcorn. So big was that reaction that the cinema industry panicked. And the cinema industry withdrew all the popcorn that was in their cinemas, came up with a new lower fat recipe, and reintroduced a new popcorn into all of the cinemas in North America in just 30 days. So Art Silverman changed an entire industry in 1 month, just with the power of what? You got it? Reaches for pen? Images. Well done. The power of images. Where you can, use images in your presentations rather than words, text, bullet points. I know sometimes you'll have to use graphs to explain things, and sometimes you might have to show numbers to show budgets and things. But where possible, avoid putting your text up on screen. There's a big difference between a textbook, which people can read in their own time, and a visual aid. A visual aid should have minimum words on it. The more visual it is, the better, because people remember images and they can take in information while they're looking at images. But when you put words up on a screen, you split people's attention, and they'll try and read it while you're still talking, and unfortunately, they don't remember most of the information. So images are incredibly powerful for getting people to remember your message. And don't think it's just PowerPoint. Images can be in people's minds. Sometimes the greatest slide in the world is the one in people's heads. How often have you read a good book, then seen the film version and been disappointed? Because the one in your head was so much better. So you can just say to the audience, imagine if, and they will imagine it because they can't help it. Their brains will love to imagine it. So think about images as in pictures, but also just in imagery. So you can describe things to people and they will imagine it, and it will make it a little bit more compelling for them. That's the power of images. The T of our pitch tools. Before I reveal what this word is, I think this is the hardest word to try and guess on my hangman puzzle here. I'm going to play you a really short video. This is from the BBC Sport website. It's about a really famous cyclist called Chris Froome. And it gives loads of facts about Chris Froome because he'd done so many things. He'd won the Tour de France several times. He was an Olympic gold medalist. And they're using this tool to try and make all these facts easy for us to understand. So have a quick look at the video and just see. It's pretty fast. There's lots of words, so try and keep up. And see if you can work out what word they're using here that writers use. So what do you think? They're taking lots of big facts about how many calories he has, the distances he rides, the water he drinks, and they're comparing it to things that we might understand. The word for doing that is making something tangible. Tangible. When you make something tangible to your audience, you compare the known, something they already understand, to the unknown. So it's really important that when you start using tangible tools in your content, it's really important that you know your audience, because you're comparing something they already get to your new idea, whatever it is you're trying to talk to them about. It's a shortcut for your audience to go, oh, okay, I get it, it's a bit like that. And you can literally use that phrase. You can say, this is a bit like what they did in our neighbouring county last year, and it worked there. Or this is a bit like what the finance department did for you 6 months ago. If it's something that your audience get, then it's really, really useful because they suddenly make that connection between the known and the unknown. It is important to know your audience, otherwise, you're not going to get that connection. So to give you some examples of that, if you take a zoo as an example, who's the target audience for a zoo? Who are they aiming at? Children. Predominantly, that's their target audience. So if a zoo was going to explain to its audience how much food a rhinoceros eats, they're not going to say it in kilograms or anything because kids aren't going to understand what that means. They're going to put it in something kids understand, like, I don't know, school dinners. And they might say, a rhinoceros eats 120 school dinners a day, so that their audience gets it. Because we take something we know and we compare it to the unknown. When I was traveling around the world with my family, this is a photograph of me at somebody's house, a friend of mine's house who lived in Brisbane in Australia, and this map was on his wall. And this is me trying to plan whether I can drive my camper van from the east coast of Australia to Alice Springs in the middle and get back again in time for the ship that I was going to put the van on eventually. And I didn't know how big Australia was. I was saying to my friend, how big is this country? And he went on the internet and found this picture and said, that is how big it is. Suddenly I get it, because that's the outline of Australia over Europe. I know Europe, I don't understand Australia. So comparing the two gives me that link from one to the other. So as a shortcut for helping your audience out to understand something maybe difficult or a new idea, have a little think about a tangible that could explain it. It's a bit like what we did over there, or it's a bit like something else. If it's an innovation, it'd be like saying it's a bit like what Steve Jobs did for the iPod or whatever. So have a think about comparisons. That's the easy way of getting a shortcut for people. Make it tangible. By the way, this is also relevant for anything that you can touch, feel, smell. If there's something, maybe a new drug has come onto the market and you want people to understand why it's easier to administer. Maybe maybe you need fewer of them. So you could compare the number of tablets that the old treatment required in a massive kind of tub or a container and go, all of this treatment is now available with this number of tablets. And suddenly, because we can see it or we can feel it, it becomes tangible to us. Right, that's the first three tools. Personal, images, and tangible. 2 more to go. This tool here, the C, is brilliant if you're talking to a room full of experts. If you have that daunting mission of talking to people who you reckon know it all, and you feel a little bit intimidated because maybe you're junior to them and they're, experts, professors, heads of departments or whatever, and you think, oh man, this is quite scary. This is a brilliant tool for those moments. What this tool does is it taps into something called gap theory. That's the psychology word for it, gap theory. Gap theory is where you expose a gap in somebody's knowledge and they will work really hard to try and fill that gap. They actually end up working really hard with you. They want the information. They suddenly crave the information that you've got to share with them because of gap theory. Here's a really simple kind of pop culture example of where gap theory was used for comedic effect. The TV show Friends. If you imagine the 6 characters in Friends, if I were to say to you, which of the 6 characters do you reckon considers themselves the most intelligent of them all? the one who's the most intelligent? You would probably say, if you've ever seen the show, that would be Ross, the guy in the middle. Because Ross is a paleontologist, he went to university, he became a professor of paleontology, and now he lectures in paleontology. He's a man of science. Of the 6 of them, Ross considers himself the most intelligent. So the writers capitalize on this with gap theory in an episode where Chandler comes home from the office. It's the Thanksgiving Day episode, and Chandler says to his friends, "Oh, we played this game in the office where you have to name all 50 states of the United States. You have to write them down, and it's the first person who can write down all 50 states wins." And of course, they're different characters, so Joey misunderstands it, Phoebe gets bored, but one person won't let it go. Ross. Ross says, "I'm so sure I'm going to get all 50. I don't even want my turkey dinner until I've achieved this." And he just sits there all through the episode. He's trying to name all 50 states of the United States. The fact he can't do it drives him mad. And the punchline of the joke is that at 2 o'clock in the morning, he eventually turns up at Chandler's door and says, "Give me my turkey dinner. I've finally done it." And he hands him a piece of paper. And Chandler looks at the list and says, "Dude, you've got one on here twice." And he still hasn't done it. That is the power of gap theory. When you have an expert in front of you, if you expose a gap in their knowledge, they'll work really hard to try and fill it. So the tool we're using that begins with C is what, do you reckon? I'll start filling letters in. See how quickly you get it. Are you shouting it out? You probably are. Curiosity. We need to alight a sense of curiosity in our audience to keep them hooked in and keep them engaged. Storytellers do this all the time. There are loads of bits of films that you watch and you think, "Oh, what's that about? Why are they saying that? Or who's that person?" You see it in books all the time. They give you a little bit of information, but they don't spoon feed you everything in one go, because that would be boring. So curiosity is really useful for keeping an audience engaged. I've done it here with these missing letters. Just a little element of you going, "Oh, what is that going to be? What's that going to be?" just to keep you hooked in. So rather than spoon feeding your audience information, just think from time to time, hold a bit back. Let them do some work. So if it was a graph, for instance, you might have something like, it's a pretty standard graph here that I've just taken from a different company I was working at with some sales figures. But rather than giving them the whole set of sales figures, you could show something like this and say, so there are the figures between April and June. Anyone guess what the figure might be for July based on that? Any thoughts? And someone will shout something out and you can kind of go, yeah, it was pretty close to 6,000. So what do you reckon the figure is for August then? And someone will shout out and you can go, actually no, it was a disastrous month. Suddenly they're hooked in because you're playing a bit of a game with them and you're getting them involved. Newspapers do this all the time. Journalists use this technique to hook in readers all the time. You'll quite often see a newspaper headline that asks a question. This is Theresa May calling a snap general election. Has May lost her gamble? The BBC News website. These are all headlines from that BBC News website. And look, each one is posed as a question. The idea being that you hook readers in. They want to know the answer to that question. So curiosity can be a really valuable way of getting your audience hooked in. The simple way of doing it is by asking them a question. Have you any idea how many patients come through that clinic's door in an average week? Any thoughts? Any idea at all? If no one's helping you out, you can suggest a few numbers. More than 100? Less than 100? What do you think? Just get them in, because that sense of curiosity is what's going to hook your audience in. All right, it's time for the final pitch tool of the 5, and this is the most important tool. It's only at the end because it spells pitch, This is the big one, right? This one, it begins with H, and before I fill in what the word is, we're going to discuss something that was identified by a journalism professor over in California called Professor Ed Cray, who talked about the curse of knowledge. That's enough of that. The curse of knowledge. The curse of knowledge is basically this. In journalism terms, when Ed Cray was talking to his students, he would say, the challenge you have is that the more you know about the story you're going to write, the more difficult it is to crystallize that story in a simple phrase. How do you sum it up, just the essence of that story, in one simple phrase? You're cursed by the amount of knowledge you've got. And you'll be the same. If you've stayed really close to a project, maybe you've met all the people involved and you've seen it through its certain processes and you've been really close to this for ages, you're really expert in it. The danger is that you can go into your meeting or your presentation and you basically kind of download all of that, or as much as you can, in the short time that's allowed to you. And of course what happens then is that people are a little bit overwhelmed by it all, and they will leave that meeting or that presentation, and if somebody asks them, what was that about? They won't be able to give a clear answer. In one of our previous recap sessions, when we talked about the pro writing structure, I used a genuine example from Spark last year of a girl who was trying to persuade the people responsible for holding the funds at the council for clinics. She was trying to persuade them to grant treatments to HIV patients who had a lower CD count, because if they came in for treatment earlier, they wouldn't then become long-term sick. By holding back treatment until people were so ill, they were actually spending more money on those patients further down the line, and the hospitals and clinics were getting clogged up. So it was really quite a big project. It was a big story. There was a lot of context to think about. But ultimately, it boiled down to one simple message. Fund HIV treatment earlier and it will relieve the pressure on clinics. That was at the heart of what she was talking about. So have you any idea what we're describing with this tool here, where you take a big complex story or a big chunk of information and sum it up into one simple line? It is the power of the headline. So journalists do this all the time, of course. It's what you see at the top of an article. It sums up the whole article in one line. But businesses also do this. When they've got something big and complicated, they need to be able to sum it up in a line so that their customers get it. And hopefully their customers then tell other people about it. A good headline should be simple, concise, repeatable. It should stick in people's minds. So we're going for something simple and concise, something memorable and something repeatable in a headline. So in business, I'll give you an example. This is from the Apple Watch launch from last year. So they launched the new Apple Watch, and it does loads of things. Obviously, it's full of gadgets and wizardry, and it does like 100 different things, but they sum it up in a headline. It's 40 million songs on your wrist. That's what they want you to remember about this product. It does loads of other stuff, but they have whittled it down to one repeatable headline for people. In politics, you see it used a lot. So if you cast your mind back to the USA general election of 2016, so this is Trump versus Clinton, Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump had a headline for his campaign. I wonder if you can remember what it was. He was going to make America great again. Now, regardless of what you think of his politics or his personality, that is a great headline. It's simple, it's repeatable, it's memorable, and the best thing about it is it's a simple statement of fact. Whether he achieves it or not, I don't know. But as a headline, it's a simple statement of fact. So don't think of a headline as it's got to be catchy or like a jingle or rhyme or have alliteration. Don't think of it as a sales tool. Just make it a simple statement of fact. Like our example from Spark last year, fund HIV patients earlier and it will relieve the pressure on clinics. That's the statement of fact. That's everything I want to talk about. So the reason it works when it's a statement of fact, to use this Make America Great Again example, he was able to use that in sentences. So he was able to say, one of the ways we'll make America great again is by solving immigration. Or one of the ways we'll make America great again is we're going to build a wall. One of the ways we'll make America great again is by bringing jobs back to the USA. So whatever his message, whoever he was talking to, he was able to weave that headline in, and that's what makes it memorable. Can you remember Hillary Clinton's headline? Most people can't. Stronger together, which is just a bit ambiguous. Stronger than what? Together with whom? So don't be clever or smart with it. Just look at all your content and think, how could I sum that up in one line? Because once you can do that, you can repeat it throughout your message. And that's what will make people remember it. So again, to use that example of the clinics that she wanted to get funding earlier for patients with a lower CD count, she was able to say, there are 3 things that I'm going to talk about that I hope will persuade you to fund these patients earlier and relieve the congestion on clinics. The first way that we're going to fund patients earlier and relieve congestion on clinics is looking at costings. I'm going to demonstrate how the upfront cost is repaid later on. So you can start to repeat it throughout your presentation. By doing that, people will leave, and if they bump into somebody, have a coffee, and they go, oh, what was the presentation about? Rather than going, oh, it was about the costs of medicine being, it was much higher costs later on, or hopefully they'll go, it's about funding patients earlier to relieve congestion in clinics. Boom. So it's really powerful. The other great thing about distilling your message into a headline is once you've done that, when you're preparing your content, you can then apply it to everything you've got in front of you, content-wise. So once you've distilled your message, you can then look at everything else in your presentation, in your script and your content, and think, does that serve my headline? If it doesn't, you can get rid of it. Does that serve my headline? No, I'm going to take that out. So let's go back to give you a real world example. Supposing that example from Spark, we were talking about that. If in her presentation she had something to do with travel time from villages to the clinic, she could look at that bit of her presentation and ask herself, is the bus from the village to the clinic, is that to do with funding patient care earlier? No. I'm going to take that out because that's for a different meeting. The result of doing that editing is that your finished presentation will be concise, it will be clear, you will have that most beautiful and rarest of qualities that writers everywhere strive for, brevity, and your audience will love you for it. So work hard on looking at your content of your idea and thinking, what's the headline? How do I sum it up in a simple statement? And then does everything I'm talking about relate to that? And they are your 5 pitch tools. Make it personal, use imagery where you can, make things tangible if they're complicated, use a sense of curiosity, and most important of all, what's the headline? What's the core message that you're sharing with people? I am not expecting you to use all 5 of these tools every time you have a conversation with somebody. It might be a bit much. But certainly start trying them out the next time you're writing some content to present to people. And definitely every time nail this down. What is your core message? How would you sum it up? If you've got any questions about everything we've talked about here or in any of the other Spark recaps that I've done, just add them to the comment section underneath the video and I will happily help you out. Even if you're not watching the live one, I'm just going to check with my production team here. All right, we're all good here. I hope you've enjoyed these recaps. Thanks so much for watching. My name's Simeon Corty. I work for a company called Body Talk, and this is the last of my recaps. So from me, goodbye.